Ever feel like trying to figure out what the right thing to do is?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, wandering around in the dark.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, luckily for us, on today's deep dive, we're going to ditch the darkness and break out the philosophical GPS, thanks to Immanuel Kant and his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals.
And believe me, this isn't just some boring old philosophy lecture, okay?
Yeah.
What Kant was trying to do, trying to find this, like, rock-solid foundation for morality, a moral law that applies to everyone.
Right.
It's actually incredibly relevant to, how we deal with right and wrong, even today, centuries later.
Yeah, totally. I've actually caught myself thinking about this recently. Like, what is it that actually makes an action morally good?
Yeah.
Is it just like following the rules? Or is
Yeah.
there something more to it?
Right.
And luckily for us, again, we've got excerpts from Kant himself to dig into. Plus, some seriously insightful commentary from scholars like Marcia Barron and Shelley Kagan.
And those commentators are super helpful, let me tell you. Well, he wasn't exactly known for writing in plain English. Yeah.
But hey, that's what we're here for, right? To break down those complex ideas into something, that we can actually wrap our heads around and maybe even use.
I am all for that. Okay, so where do we even begin with a guy like Kant?
Well, he kicks off the groundwork with a question, and when you really stop and think about it, it's kind of mind-blowing. What's so great about doing something good if you're only doing it because you feel like it,
Okay, I think I see where he's going with this. Like, if you're only doing something good because you want a pat on the back or because it just makes you feel good.
Right.
Is it really all that good?
Exactly. And that, my friend, is where Kant introduces this super important idea, the goodwill. He says straight up, it's the only thing that's just good on its own, good without needing anything else to, justify it.
Okay.
Not happiness, not even good consequences.
So it's not about just being, like, a goody two-shoes.
Right.
It's more about the motivation behind the good things you do.
Yeah.
You got it. Now, hold on to your hats, because this is where things get really interesting. Kant draws a really important distinction between, on the one hand, acting from this goodwill, which he calls acting from duty,
Okay.
and on the other hand, acting from things like self-interest or just because it feels good in the moment. Those things aren't necessarily bad, but for Kant, they don't have that same moral oomph, that moral weight.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a sec. What about someone who is just naturally a very compassionate person? Like, they don't even have to think about being kind to others. It just comes naturally to them.
Yeah.
Is Kant saying that for some reason they're morally worse because it's effortless?
That's a super common misunderstanding of Kant. He's definitely not saying that good inclinations are bad, not at all. What he's saying is that, well, for an action to have that true, deep moral worth, it can't just be like a knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
It has to come from a deeper commitment to doing your duty, from following a principle that goes beyond how you happen to feel at any given moment.
So yeah, it's like obviously awesome to be a naturally compassionate person.
Right.
But what makes an action truly moral for Kant is making that conscious choice to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it.
Right. Exactly. And to help us figure out what that right thing actually is, Kant gives us this tool. He calls it the categorical imperative. But you can think of it like a filter for your actions.
A filter for your actions.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so how does this filter actually work?
So Kant would say that every single action that we take is driven by some maxim. A maxim is basically like an underlying rule, a principle behind the action.
Yep.
The categorical imperative basically helps us see if that maxim, that rule behind our action, is morally sound, if it holds up.
Okay.
Now, he actually describes the categorical imperative in a few different ways, but let's start with probably the most famous one, the formula of universal law.
Hit me with it. What is this formula of universal law?
Okay, it boils down to this. Think about the maxim, the rule behind your action, and ask yourself, could I rationally will that everyone act on that maxim as if it were a universal law? If the answer is no, then morally speaking, that action is a no-go.
All right, can you give me an example? Sometimes I need to see it in action, Break it down Barney style for me.
Okay, perfect example. Let's say you are super tempted to break a promise.
Happens all the time.
Right. You're about to borrow some money, and you know you probably won't pay it back. But could you rationally will that everyone behave like that? break their promises.
Well, no, because then promises would be meaningless. No one would trust each other.
Exactly. So that maxim, that rule, it's okay to break promises.
Right.
It fails the test. It fails the formula of universal law test.
Right.
And that, my friend, is the formula of universal law in action. It shows us how some actions, when you zoom out, are fundamentally at odds with reason itself.
Right.
And therefore morally wrong.
So it's not just about me and what I want in this moment.
Exactly.
It's about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's like, what kind of world would we be living in if everyone followed that same rule? Kant, he was thinking on a whole other level.
Oh, absolutely. He really was. And you know what's even wilder? He does all of this without relying on religion or a specific moral code.
Yeah.
It all comes back to reason, the power of human reason.
Okay, so we've got this concept of the good will, this categorical imperative, this mind-bending idea of universal moral laws.
Right.
Where do we go from here? What's next?
Well, Kant doesn't stop at just the form of the moral law. He also talks about its matter.
Hold on. Before we get too deep in the weeds here,
Yeah.
can you maybe explain what you mean by that? Form versus matter of the moral law.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Oh, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's a little lost.
No, that's a great question. It's a perfect spot to pause and clarify. Yeah, no problem. So think of it like this. The form of the moral law, that's kind of like the actual compass, you know?
Okay.
It's how it works, how it's supposed to point us in the right direction.
Okay, got it.
The matter is more about what that direction actually is. Like, what are those moral guidelines actually about? What should they be focused on?
Okay, so the form is that's the categorical imperative, that whole universal law thing we were talking about.
Right.
And then the matter is the what? Like what those universal laws are actually all about.
Exactly. You got it. And for Kant, that what, that very heart of morality, is all about respecting the inherent worth and dignity of every rational being.
Okay.
Of all of us.
Okay, so it's kind of like saying, hey, we're all in this humanity thing together.
Right.
We got to treat each other with respect.
Yes.
But I'm curious, how does Kant actually lay that out, in more detail?
Well, he gives us another version of his categorical imperative. It's called the formula of humanity, and it's a real gut check. Ready for this? Treat humanity, whether it's in yourself or in other people, always as an end in itself. Never merely as a means to an end.
Okay.
Never just a means.
So we can't just use people to get what we want, like they're just tools or something.
Right.
We have to really recognize that other people have value just because they're human, just like us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what? This actually connects to another one of Kant's really radical ideas, true human freedom. And he's not talking about just like doing whatever the heck you want whenever you want.
Okay.
He's talking about a much deeper kind of freedom, a freedom that comes from choosing to do what's moral,
Okay.
even when it's really hard.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So we're not just slaves to our desires, to whatever we happen to feel like doing. We actually have the power to choose to follow the moral law, even if that means going against our gut feeling.
Exactly. Now, you might be wondering, how does this all actually play out in the real world, right? So to try to illustrate this, Kant introduces this idea of a realm of ends. Imagine, like, a society where everyone acts autonomously, they make their own choices, but they're all guided by these universal moral principles, these ideas that we've been talking about.
Okay.
They all respect each other's dignity, their inherent worth as human beings.
So in this realm of ends, it's not about following a strict set of rules. It's more about everyone acting as rational beings.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that, we all recognize that inherent worth in ourselves and in everyone else.
Yes, exactly. It's a beautiful vision, right?
Yeah.
But it's also really, really challenging.
Right.
Because it requires us to constantly be thinking about that balance between our own freedom
Right.
and the dignity of other people.
Okay, I've got to be honest, this is all pretty mind-blowing stuff, but it also feels, I don't know, kind of abstract, right? Like, how do we actually live in this realm of ends? What would that actually look like day to day?
That is the million-dollar question, right? It's easy to talk about it, but
Thank you.
well, think about it this way. Every time you have to make an ethical decision, every time you find yourself wrestling with a moral dilemma,
Yeah.
you're actually, in a way, participating in that realm of ends.
Okay.
You're kind of bringing it into being.
Oh, so it's not just some far-off utopia. It's actually about how we treat each other.
Yeah.
Like right here, right now.
Absolutely. It's happening all the time. So ask yourself, am I actually considering other people's needs, their autonomy,
Yeah.
Am I acting in a way that I could universalize, like we talked about? A way that would actually make sense for everyone to act.
Right.
That's how we build a world, hopefully, where everyone is treated as an end, not just a means to an end.
I'm starting to see it now. So it's about approaching all our everyday interactions
Yeah.
with that same respect for human dignity that Kant was talking about.
You got it. That's it. It's about trying to make choices that really acknowledge the inherent worth of everyone involved,
Right.
Not just ourselves.
It's interesting. When we first started talking about Kant, I thought it was going to be all about like rigid rules and moral absolute.
Right.
But now I'm realizing that it's actually a much richer way of thinking about ethics.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because it's true. It's definitely not always easy, but engaging with Kant's ideas, even if you don't agree with all of them, they can really challenge us,
Yeah.
It pushes us to be more thoughtful, more responsible people, and that's always a good thing.
Okay, so we've talked about the what and the how of Kant's moral law, but what about the why? Like, why should we even care about all of this? What's in it for me?
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real.
Okay, that's fair.
So we've been really digging into this idea of duty, these universal moral laws, even this wild concept of freedom from Kant. But
Right.
there's one big piece of the puzzle we haven't really talked about yet.
Okay.
Happiness.
Yeah, you're right. It's a big one.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of ethical systems out there, happiness is like the goal, the gold standard.
Totally.
But Kant, he throws us a bit of a curveball here.
Okay, now you've got me really interested. Hit me with it.
Okay, so first of all, Kant doesn't say that happiness is bad. It's not like it's some evil thing to be avoided.
Okay.
But he does argue that it shouldn't be the foundation of morality. Remember how we were talking about acting from duty? For Kant, being moral, it's about doing what's right because it's right, not because it gives us some, warm, fuzzy feeling inside.
So it's not about chasing pleasure or avoiding pain.
Exactly.
It's about a commitment to something, bigger.
Yeah.
Something bigger than just our own little fleeting emotions.
You nailed it. And here's where Kant gets really radical. He actually suggests that real, true happiness, it's a byproduct of living a moral life. When we act from duty, like we've been talking about, when we really try to live in that realm of ends, that's when we become worthy of happiness, according to Kant.
Whoa, so it's almost like happiness is a consequence of being moral, not the reason for it.
Exactly. It's such a subtle difference, but it makes all the difference in the world. You see, morality, it's not some kind of transaction for Kant.
Right.
It's not a means to an end, like, if I do all this moral stuff, then I'll get to be happy.
Right.
No way. It's an end in itself.
It's kind of like that old saying, virtue is its own reward. Although I gotta say, Kant's version is definitely a lot more intense than, a gold star sticker, right?
Right. But it's also incredibly powerful. Because Kant would say that true happiness, it's not just some fleeting feeling that comes and goes. It's much deeper than that.
Okay.
It's a lasting sense of harmony between what we want, our desires, and our reason, that deeper part of ourselves.
So it's not about, stuffing our faces with donuts all day long.
Right.
Although that sounds pretty good. It's more about finding that true, deep satisfaction in, trying to live a life guided by these principles.
Yes, exactly. It's about striving to actually align our lives, our actions, with that moral compass we've been talking about this whole time, with that universal moral law.
Right.
And you know what? This actually brings us right back to freedom. Because for Kant, real freedom, true freedom, it's not just the ability to do whatever we want whenever we want.
Okay.
It's about being free from something else. It's about being free from the tyranny of always chasing after those fleeting desires. Okay, I see. So it's almost like real freedom comes from making the tough choices, even when they're not the easy choices or the fun choices.
Yes, that's it. It's about having the strength to act according to our principles, even when it's really hard.
Right.
Even when no one's watching.
Yeah.
That's where true freedom lies, and that's also where we find true happiness, according to Kant.
Wow. You know what? It's funny. We started this whole deep dive with what seemed like a pretty simple question. What makes something morally right? And now, thanks to Kant, we're talking about duty and freedom and happiness, and
right.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. But, that's the beauty of engaging with these big thinkers, isn't it? They challenge us.
Yeah.
They push us to really examine our own assumptions.
Right.
To consider different perspectives, maybe perspectives we've never even thought about before.
Right.
To really grapple with what it even means to be human. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
We've definitely thrown a lot at you today, listeners, but hopefully you're walking away with a deeper understanding of what Kant was trying to get across, and maybe even some ideas about how it might apply to your own life.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's always so much more to explore in Kant's work and in philosophy in general.
Right.
So please don't let this be the end of it. Keep digging, keep questioning, keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to just, memorize Kant's theories.
Right.
It's to actually use them.
Yes.
Use them as a springboard for your own ethical reflections.
Exactly.
So until next time, keep those philosophical gears turning.